Thank you, John. The group of defendants named in these actions are comprised of individuals and organizations who either perpetrated or who were made aware of the sexual abuse of the survivors. Such organizations include Sword of the Spirit, SOS, and Servants of the Word, SOW. SOS is an international religious association that promotes ultra-Orthodox Christian values, encouraging members to live in the charismatic communities and to follow biblical teachings as interpreted by its founder and other key leaders. SOW is a monastic leadership base of SOS. Brothers of SOW, the term used for members of this male-only organization, make either a fixed or a lifelong celibate commitment to live single for the Lord and are to follow set guidelines throughout their interactions with members of SOS communities and the general public. SOW maintains brotherhood houses across various national and international SOS communities in which brothers and affiliates of SOW reside and host events and activities. Both Conlin and Treadwell were members of SOS and SOW at the times of all incidents that will be discussed today. Aside from being leaders within the organizations, both perpetrators, Edward Conlin and Jamie Treadwell, are known internationally as celebrities or rock stars throughout the communities. Conlin for his music and Treadwell for his artwork. SOS-SOW was notified in the mid-1990s regarding abuse of minors involved in their affiliate organizations. Trust was broken and abuse occurred. And abuse occurred, and abuse occurred, and abuse occurred over and over again because there was a cover-up by SOS-SOW. And it wasn't until relatively recently that SOS-SOW launched an internal investigation into the abuse allegation. Such an investigation should have occurred decades ago when abuse was first reported to the leadership of SOS and SOW. It appears that the relatively recent internal investigation that SOS-SOW was having done has been put on hold, at least per the information that is currently being provided to members of their community due to the pending lawsuits. However, there is no court order preventing SOS-SOW from conducting their internal investigation. If the internal investigation is done independently and in search of the truth, it should provide transparency for its community members, survivors, and seek to give the survivors justice. Currently, the lawsuits consist of 3 related civil actions. The plaintiffs included in each lawsuit are as follows: Jane Doe, a minor, Sonia Chernowski and Christian Chernowski, Michelle Medine and Ashling Kennedy, and Jamie Kratz-Hahn. Hannah Smith is a related survivor of sexual assault, but she has not yet filed a lawsuit. All cases relate to the sexual assault, abuse, molestation, and non-consensual sexual touching and harassment by Edward Conlin and Jamie Treadwell. The sexual assaults took place in the United Kingdom, Lansing, Detroit, and Grand Rapids. We are in negotiations to hopefully resolve the cases via mediation to swiftly as possible obtain accountability, transparency, justice for the survivors. As we know, there is no amount of money that can be given to the survivors that can correct the horrors of predatory sexual abuse to which they were subjected. Now it's the survivors' turn to tell their stories. Next, Carly will read a statement on behalf of survivor Michelle Medine.
Thank you, Aina. Good morning. My name is Carly Reynolds. Like Aina said, I'm going to read a statement on behalf of Michelle Medine, who is here today but will not be speaking, as she's currently involved in pending investigation that is related to the abuse. Michelle's abuse occurred in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and her lawsuit was filed in Washtenaw County. When Michelle first met Ed Conlin in 1991, she was 12 years old. Ed was approximately 35. In his capacity as a member and leader within SOS and a brother within SOW, Ed was a youth worker who held himself out to be a celibate man. He was also the associate director of an SOS affiliated youth organization in Belfast, Northern Ireland, called Youth Initiatives. Soon after Michelle met Ed, Ed began to groom her. When Michelle was just 14, Ed began to sexually abuse her. They began to meet privately multiple times each week, during which times Ed proceeded to sexually assault Michelle. The misconduct in which he engaged included, but was not limited to, kissing, fondling, groping, digital penetration, and ejaculation. Reports were made to upper leadership of SOS and SOW in 1996, but Ed's involvement with Michelle became more widely known in 1998 when a second survivor came forward. It was then that Youth Initiative staff, under the direction of Jamie Treadwell, asked Michelle about her contact with Ed. Although she found the timing strange, Michelle divulged the details of his sexual abuse. Very quickly, Ed was removed from Belfast, never to be seen by Michelle again. In the weeks to follow, Michelle was interviewed by 4 men from SOW and the SOS community in Belfast. The men assured Michelle that they would promptly report Ed and that he would never work with girls and young women again. Michelle took them at their word. She believed and she trusted the men. The group warned Michelle not to speak of her relationship with Ed, as doing such would lead to the collapse of the Youth Initiatives organization. In doing so, they placed the burden on Michelle to carry. Michelle kept quiet and never saw Ed again. Her only communication with Ed since his transfer was in 1999 when Ed mailed a card to Michelle on her wedding day. This was another attempt to control Michelle and was extremely upsetting for her. More than 20 years later, in January 2020, Michelle received a message that stated Jamie Treadwell had been arrested for child abuse. Michelle's past encounters with Ed Conlon came flooding back into her memory, as Jamie had been Ed's direct supervisor and was the individual who had been placed to handle Ed's child abuse in Belfast, Northern Ireland. In recognizing Jamie himself was a child abuser, Michelle requested all information and communications that SOS and SOW had on her file. To her horror, she received numerous emails and read in detail the steps and conversations in which SOS and SOW engaged to cover up Ed's abuse of children in Belfast in the 1990s. She discovered many people had approached SOS and SOW with worries and concerns about Ed's behaviors towards Michelle. She read that on various occasions, Ed was provided an opportunity to explain his actions and to tell his story. Michelle's voice, on the other hand, had never been heard. In that moment, the failures of SOS and SOW came to light, including their failure to make accurate reports to Belfast authorities, their failure in allowing Ed, a known sexual predator, to flee the country, and their failure to protect other women and children from Ed and allowing him to work with young and vulnerable populations back in the United States. In the last 3 years, Michelle has begun her personal journey of understanding the abuse that happened to her as a child, that it was not her fault, that it was not a romantic relationship, and that it was abuse. In doing so, she's had to sit with her children, her parents, her family, and her friends to explain this painful time from her past. As rumors of Ed's abuse began to run rampant throughout these communities internationally, Michelle was terrified that someone would reveal her name on social media because she wanted to be in control of the situation for the first time. Michelle kept her identity hidden for the last 20 years until a few weeks back when SOS and SOW circulated an email to all of their communities that fully disclosed her identity. Once again, they took away her power. SOS and SOW valued a sex offender's life more than those of his victims. They protected and harbored Ed Conlon, and in doing so, gave him the freedom to continue engaging with future victims. As the first known survivor of Ed's abuse, Michelle struggles with a sense of guilt. Had she spoken out sooner, perhaps she could have saved other girls from this nightmare. Today, She passes all the responsibility and all the guilt back to Ed Conlon, to SOS and SOW. The blame is on her perpetrators and their enablers, not on Michelle or any other survivor. Today, Michelle is no longer a victim. Today, she is a survivor.
Thank you, Carly. Next, we will hear from survivor Aisling Kennedy.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Aisling Kennedy, and I am from Belfast, Northern Ireland, where my abuse took place. At the age of 12, living in West Belfast, it was extremely common to witness daily news bulletins, sectarian murders, religious conflict, terrorist bombs and bullets. Finding youth initiatives at this age was a path of hope, which was way beyond what I could ever have expected growing up during the conflict and troubles in Northern Ireland. It was vibrant, a youth group with dance, drama, music, and a Christian community. I wasn't familiar with this concept, having only known Catholic Sunday Mass as an access to knowing and loving God. Youth initiatives had it all. I was meeting Protestants for the first time ever. They were just like me. Only there were no barricades or soldiers separating us. It truly was an inspiring and hopeful time in created by Jamie Treadwell, the director, and Ed Conlon, associate director. Youth Initiatives was one of the many branches of the Servants of the Word and Sword of the Spirit tree. This was a worldwide ecumenical organization with the common mission of working together for Christ. What could go wrong? Jamie Treadwell went on to become a convicted pedophile. Ed Conlon has committed countless acts of sexual abuse, assault, and molestation, as well as consistent emotional trauma to both minors and young vulnerable women. The Servants of the Word and the Sword of the Spirit have many, many members who have turned a blind eye and bought into the concept that ignorance was bliss. I was groomed by Ed Conlon throughout the 1990s, and the grooming progressed to sexual contact in 1997. Publicly, he was still upholding the position of being celibate for God, a man of exceptional morals and integrity. As this period of deception continued, I struggled to practice the tenets of my faith and to be part of this religious community absent of guilt. Therefore, I came forward and shared what type of contact Ed and I had been having. This resulted in me being shunned from the community. I had given everything to my whole teenage life. I was broken. It also resulted in Ed being transferred back to the US with the promise that he would never again have access to young females or vulnerable women. In 2012, thanks to the rise in popularity of social media, my dear friend Sinead witnessed posts on Facebook of a friend she had met during her time at Detroit Outreach. These posts clearly portrayed Ed in contact with youth and young women. Alarmed to see this, knowing the restrictions that were imposed on Ed, Sinead reached out to Ken Noker of Servants of the Word. Querying what access Ed had to females and what supervision he was under, he was reassured that Ed had been remorseful and that the youth works and addictions organisations Ed was working for were aware of his past and his restrictions. Despite their empty assurances, it later transpired Ed was again using his access to young females for his own perverted gratification. I speak today as a survivor of Ed Conlon's sexual abuse. I was a scapegoat for Ed's misconduct in 1998. I was particularly alienated. Relationships I had within youth initiatives were broken, and this caused serious hurt and pain. Memories and realities I face thanks to Ed and his enablers has been traumatic and painful. With each new revelation of another victim, I am forced to face the trauma over and over again. There should not have been any further victims following my disclosure in 1998. There was more concern for the protection of youth initiatives, Servants of the Word, Sword of the Spirit, and Ed than there was for protecting me or preventing further potential victims. As long as their ratings were good, their members were blindsided, and their egos were boosted, my story would become insignificant and the questions would stop. Please don't stop asking the questions of this organisation until you're 100% certain you would trust them with everything you have, your faith, your family, and even with your daughters. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Next will be Sonia Tranowski, who will read a statement on behalf of survivor Jamie Kratz-Hans, who is not present here with us today.
Thank you. Hello. I want to share the story of another plaintiff who was unable to be here today, Jamie Kratz-Hans. She experienced abuse from Ed Conlin in Ann Arbor and Detroit and has filed a civil complaint in Washtenaw County. When Ed was flown swiftly out of Belfast in 1998, he was moved to the Servants of the Word Brotherhood headquarters here in Chelsea, Michigan. Within a few short years after being removed from Belfast because of those sexual relationships with teenage girls in the high school youth group, he was promoted by the Brotherhood to go work at a drug rehabilitation center as an addiction counselor with vulnerable people in the throes of battling drug addictions. He originally worked at Dawn Farms in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and then at the Capuchin Soup Kitchen. This is where he met this vulnerable young autistic woman, Jamie Kratz-Hans. In the early 2000s, she was a volunteer at Dawn Farms drug rehab facility. From that time to 2010, Ed proceeded to mentally and psychologically coerce and abuse this vulnerable young woman. Her civil complaint details the emotional suffering and anguish she suffered at his hands and the devastating permanent consequences Ed's controlling relationship continues to have on her life. Her story is very important, even if there was no direct physical sexual abuse or contact. Ed's abuse was not just sexual abuse, but a controlling and consuming mental abuse, which he has held over children and vulnerable adults for decades. I actually lived around the corner from Ed Conlin during part of this time. He spent in Detroit, Michigan. He spent every day with this young woman who was half his age. The brothers, the Servants of the Word brothers, whom now I know knew the full extent of what had occurred with Michelle and Aisling in Belfast, just watched this happen and said nothing to deter the time they spent together. Instead, Ed was hailed as someone who was especially close to God and gifted at working with the homeless and the needy.
Thank you, Mrs. Tranowski. We appreciate you reading the statement on behalf of Ms. Kratz-Hans. Next will be survivor Hannah Smith.
Good morning. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for giving us the space to tell our stories. My name is Hannah Smith, and when I was 13, I was raped by Ed Conlin, a member of Servants of the Word. It occurred during an organized prayer event in the Servants of the Word house in Detroit. Nearly 50 years my senior, he was very close to my family, and I grew up calling him my uncle. My life will forever be affected by what he did to me. As others have explained, Sword of the Spirit is an international religious group for all Christian denominations. The idea of the organization was to be able to surround yourself and raise families with other like-minded Christians in small local branches called communities. The group is completely insular and protected from anyone who might challenge it. I can speak firsthand and say, although the idea was to have a safe, family-centered, supportive community, the reality is that this group is much more like a cult. These communities are incredibly harmful to grow up in, especially as a woman. Being born into it meant my entire identity and view of myself was shaped by this organization. I was taught to believe that being raped by a grown adult man was my fault. The Servants of the Word, also called the Brotherhood, is a group of adult men within the Sword of the Spirit that make a lifelong commitment to stay single and celibate for the Lord. They claim a life of utmost holiness, purity, and respect, and they are put on pedestals as the holiest people within the community. The result of having these men as the leaders becomes very toxic and harmful family and group systems, with emotionally unavailable fathers and husbands, and women and children who are supposed to submit to men without question at any time. As children, we were told that the Brotherhood men were supposed to be revered and obeyed. They were welcome in your home at any time. They were to be trusted and listened to always, because through their lifestyle, they were supposedly closer to God. This environment becomes the perfect breeding ground and protection for rapists and pedophiles, with children who have been groomed and conditioned to fully believe that sexual abuse is their fault and even deserved. Outside of this community, the logical human response to finding out that a grown man has raped a child would be to punish the abuser. But the response when trying to protect a cult-like system is to blame the children and protect the abusers, and to send the abusers to different community branches, granting them full access to more young, vulnerable, and unprotected children. This is what has been going on within the Sword of the Spirit for decades. They have never been held accountable. They have continued to lie, protect these men, and do everything possible to shut down anyone who tries to stand against them. I stand here today as a survivor of rape by a man who was a known sexual abuser for more than 15 years prior to my abuse, before I had even been born. Had the leadership of Sword of the Spirit done what is right and listened to the young woman who bravely came forward, Ed Conlon would have been turned into legal authorities. Myself and others would never have been abused by him. Our childhoods would never have been taken away, and every aspect of our lives would never have been affected by these heinous crimes. Instead, Sword of the Spirit protected abusers at the cost of children. The only thing worse than being raped at 13 is being raped and finding out it could have been prevented. We are coming forward today because we have spent enough time being told that we don't matter, that we won't be heard, and that we won't be believed. We have spent enough time letting them twist apart our words and our stories. We will not let them take anything else from us, and we will not stand by and let them continue to protect their precious community while innocent children are harmed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Next, we will hear from survivors Sonia Tranowski and Christian Tranowski.
Thank you. Hello again. I am Sonia Tranowski, and this is my husband, Christian Tranowski. We filed a lawsuit in Ingham County on behalf of our daughter, who was sexually abused by Jamie Treadwell in Lansing, Michigan. We're here today because it's time for us to tell our story. The leaders have been telling their story, and today we're here to tell it from our own perspective, control the narrative. Christian and I met in college as members of the Sword of the Spirit outreach for colleges here in Michigan. We married and we chose to become committed members of the Sword of the Spirit community because we believed it would be the best place for us to raise a family. The Sword of the Spirit prides itself on being the best and safest place to raise children, with many support systems. One of the support systems hailed is this celibate brotherhood. The servants of the word brotherhood has the same founder as the Sword of the Spirit, and the head leaders of both organizations overlap significantly. We are told over and over that this celibate brotherhood provided an extremely beneficial support to all the families in the Sword of the Spirit, because these men, not having families of their own, had extra time to support youth programming, children, and parents. In 2016, Christian and I had 3 beautiful preschool-age daughters. None of them had even started kindergarten yet. We hired a Servants of the Word celibate brother, Jamie Treadwell, who was residing in Grand Rapids, Michigan at the time, to be our business coach. What preceded were multiple visits in our home that he initiated for business coaching meetings. Because of the relationship we had with Jamie Treadwell through the Sword of the Spirit and the 40-year-long celebrity and hero-like reputation he had in the Brotherhood, we allowed him to interact with our precious young baby girls. That is a decision I will regret for the rest of my life. Horrifically, Jamie Treadwell proceeded to cunningly groom, and molest our girls.
In 2016, Sonia and I were horrified when we discovered a child sexual predator in our home, Jamie Treadwell. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, we took immediate significant action to safeguard our children and hopefully others from this threat. Over the course of the next 3 years and beyond, we tirelessly reached out to leaders within the Sword of the Spirit and Servants of the Word organizations, sharing our story and detailing the events that occurred within our household. We did this dozens of times. Together with numerous credible reports from other families in Grand Rapids who also alleged questionable contact with Jamie Treadwell, we held hope that our concerns would be heard and that substantial measures would be taken to protect innocent children. Regrettably, despite our repeated requests over 3 years, we were denied the removal of Jamie Treadwell's artwork from the Sword of the Spirit and the Servants of the Word websites. We also sought an apology for the inadequate monitoring of Jamie by his Servant of the Word brothers, as well as a public acknowledgement from these leaders that Jamie posed a real and credible threat to children. Shockingly, we were informed that such actions would not be taken, with the added assertion that Jamie actually had a right to his good name. Faced with this unwillingness to act, in spite of many other horrifying reports from other parents of Jamie Treadwell's behavior with their children, Sonia and I realized we had no choice but to resort to drastic measures. This led us to share our story with Michigan Public Radio in 2020.
So quickly after that Michigan radio news story was published, the truth of Ed Conlon's sexual abuse of teenage girls back in Belfast was exposed on social media. We began putting more pieces together and saw documentation that Jamie Treadwell, the abuser in our home, was the director of youth initiatives when Aisling and Michelle disclosed their abuse from Ed back in '98. He had a key role in handling the abuse allegations in the '90s and a key role in keeping it quiet. This made clear to us that Jamie's involvement in abuse against minors was not a recent occurrence, but had in fact spanned decades. We filed this civil suit because we did not see any other viable way to hold the Servants of the Word brothers and the Sword of the Spirit accountable for the decades-long enabling of 2 child sex abusers. They have fraudulently promoted both men for decades, while victims and other concerned parties have raised deep concerns of why these men were being promoted. Both men had celebrity status for founding youth initiatives in Belfast. This allowed them to have free access to children and vulnerable people inside and outside of the Sword of the Spirit communities, even after allegations and concerns were brought forward. These leaders fraudulently promoted them as safe and trusted men, allowed them to travel the globe and work directly in city schools while promoting Ed's songs and Jamie Treadwell's artwork all over social media. After years of imploring these leaders to correctly handle Ed and Jamie to no avail, Christian and I concluded that Ed and Jamie were not the exception in the Servants of the Word Brotherhood. These were not 2 bad men amidst 2 bad actors amidst good men. Ed Conlon and Jamie Treadwell are not serial sexual predators in spite of the Servants of the Word. Ed Conlon and Jamie Treadwell are sexual predators because of the Servants of the Word. The leaders of these organizations have done the opposite of the very thing they state their purpose of existence is. These men split apart and decimate families. They have been and continue to be reckless. They need to be held accountable, and it is time for the truth of what they have done to be fully known.
After years of us requesting a third-party independent investigation into Jamie Treadwell, the Sword of the Spirit leadership only agreed to one after we went to Michigan Public Radio with our story, and after the truth of Ed Conlon's abuse came out on social media at the beginning of 2020. They did not actually have this third party start the investigation until 2022. Shortly after we filed our civil suit last year, the Sword of the Spirit leadership paused this third party investigation, and it is still pending. These leaders continue to tell their members the reason they can't complete the independent investigation is because of this civil suit. I want to be very clear here. There is no order from the civil courts preventing the third-party investigation to be open and ongoing. The civil suit we filed has no control over the third-party organization continuing and completing the independent investigation. True justice will only be achieved when the leaders of the Sword of the Spirit and the servants of the Word accept their responsibility in fostering an environment where predators like Jamie Treadwell and Ed Conlin can prey on children and other vulnerable individuals. We implore the leaders of the Sword of the Spirit and the servants of the Word to address their culpability honestly and ensure justice is served for all victims of their negligence. Thank you for allowing us to share our message with you today.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Tranowski, and thank you to all of the survivors here today, Ms. Michelle Medine, Ms. Ashleen Kennedy, Ms. Hannah Smith, as well as Jamie Kratz-Hahn, who is not here with us today.